All right, it being 3 minutes past 6, I'll declare the December ordinary meeting of the Shire of Capel Council open. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadani people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their culture, and to elders past and present and their descendants who are with us today, and those who will follow in their footsteps. Record of attendance, we have 7 councillors in attendance tonight. Councillor Terrantroy is on a leave of absence and Councillor Clues is an apology. Response to previous questions taken on notice was none. Public question time. We've received 2 questions on notice. Mr. Bilder.
Okay, good evening Doug, councillors, Gordon and staff. I'm the President of the Capel LCDC and I have a wide knowledge of growing native orchids. I'm concerned about the EIL at 43 Plantation Road, which is in close proximity to threatened Dracula orchids. Lot 43 is a low-lying sandy block, very rich in native flora, in particular several priority species, as well as the threatened and very rare Dracula elastica, more commonly known as the glossy-leafed hammer orchid, of which there are 193 on the site. The ground surface above the maximum groundwater level, ranges from limited area above 2 metres in the western end, down to only 1 metre above MGL at the eastern end of the proposed EIL. As the applicant proposes to excavate down to half a metre above the MGL, existing plant species in the EIL area will not be revegetated successfully on the site after excavation, as the area will be waterlogged. Revegetation with pasture would probably result in forming a weedy patch, which will be a threat to the Dracula elastica and other priority plants. Australia's Threatened Species Strategy was launched in July 2015, an action-based approach to protecting and recovering our threatened species. On plants, it includes targets to improve trajectory of 30 threatened plants by 2020, and to ensure all known threatened plants exist against extinction by 2020. 30 plant species were identified, assessing the prioritised in a strategy paper recommending actions, and the Dracula elastica threatened orchid is listed as one of these 30 plants to be protected. Question 1. If the proposed EIL were to be approved, how will these rare plants be protected? The link to this strategy paper has been provided at the base of submissions. The survival note and action states, to survive, the orchid relies on a specific fungus which assists germination and provides nutrients. It is also dependent on a single species of wasp that pollinates its flowers. Remove weeds and fence off populations. Collect seed and associated fungus to hand pollinate. Ensure habitat for the pollinating wasp is intact and protected from Phytophthora. Now we are already 2 years behind target for the protective action. Question 2. Will the Shire of Capel consider working with landowners where these threatened species exist and encourage fencing off of the populations as set out in the strategy paper? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deere, for the questions. The Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Deere, through you, Shire President. The comprehensive assessment of the EI application is still occurring, and it will be too early in this process to anticipate any potential recommendation either for or against the application. What will be prioritised throughout this assessment is a thorough understanding and desire to ensure that any groundwater and flora protection occurs and is not impacted either directly or indirectly as a result of the extraction and or the rehabilitation phase. Any development approval that may occur will ensure a high level of surface and groundwater separation to provide soil depth for rehabilitation of any native vegetation. Should the applicant fail to demonstrate this in their supporting documentation, Officer's recommendation will be reflected that way to Council. And in terms of your second question, Mr. Deere, in relation to extractive industries application, Council's recent practice has been to condition any approval to erect fencing around the property in anticipation of rehabilitation occurring following extraction. This will restrict access to kangaroos, who are renowned for eating the rehabilitated vegetation. Most operators are aware of this issue and do not have any concerns about this condition accompanying any recommendation for approval.
Are there any further public questions? Just before I move on, there was an omission in item 3, previous public questions taken on notice. There were some questions taken on notice last month from Mrs. Bronwyn-Mutton. They'll be included in the minutes, and we'll also email you those answers directly. Thank you. Item 5, application for leave of absence. Are there any? No. Declarations of interest. Received none this evening. There are no notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors, so we move to item 8, confirmation of the minutes of the 30th of November 2022 Ordinary Council meeting. Is there a mover for those minutes? The Deputy President. A seconder? Councillor Dillon. Any discussion on those minutes? Nothing from the mover? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. There are no announcements by the presiding person without discussion. There's no petitions, deputations or presentations. There's no motions of which previous notice has been given, and there's no questions of which previous notice has been given. So now move to... wasn't written down. Apologies, there is a presentation from Mr. Daniel Lewis of Element WA on ordering item 14.4, extractive industry licence for Callan Road.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening on item 14.4 of tonight's agenda. It's the amendment for the extractive industry at Lot 2, Callan Road, Jullarup. My name is Daniel Lewis, a planning consultant at Element, here on behalf of McDougall Quarries Pty Ltd, the landowner of Lot 2, Callan Road. I'm here to speak in support of the officer's recommendation for approval presented to council tonight, and request council move and support this recommendation as written. As I presented to you in October earlier this year, the officer's recommendation at the October council meeting was agreed in principle by the applicant through the SAP process. Council's decision to amend the officer's recommendation and approve an alternative recommendation has left the applicant without choice but to seek further reconsideration of condition T. The previous decision by council to limit truck movements to and from the site at 20 movements per day just simply doesn't work during a standard haulage campaign. Existing operations at Callan Road are currently operating at 130 movements per day, and I note that existing operations on Callan Road have not received any complaints from surrounding residents, and it's also reflected in the officer's recommendation in the agenda tonight. Councillors, haulage on Callan Road utilises the existing RAV3 network direct from the pit to Bustle Highway, which is sealed and capable of supporting the existing haulage operations. Therefore, receiving a condition in October of approval which reduced our existing truck movements by 80% came as a significant surprise. Following the October council meeting, we met with the planning officers to agree on a recommended condition as presented in the agenda tonight. Concerns were raised by the Shire during our discussions regarding road deterioration and the Shire's ability to receive a contribution to road maintenance for Callan Road on a per tonne basis. The proposed condition V brings what is typically managed in the extractive industry licence and has done under the current approval to a condition of approval to ensure an annual contribution to road maintenance is made as per the standard WA.gov.au co-contribution rates. We therefore commend the planning officers for their work in presenting the recommendation for approval to Council tonight. For the removal of any doubt, the recommendation for approval does not seek an increase in truck movements, but merely seeks to ensure existing operations at Callanut Road may continue and road maintenance contributions are to be provided to the Shire annually. We therefore request Council support the officer's recommendation as written and thank the Shire's planning staff for their work in getting this item back to Council for approval. We wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. There are no motions of which previous notice has been given, and there are no questions of which previous notice has been given. So we move on to section 13, Chief Executive Officer reports. 13.1, the WA.gov Best Practice Review. Is there a mover? Councillor Sciano. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Mobb. The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the Shire's, the Council Officer's recommendation to recommend the preferred structure of option 1 is good. I'm glad the officer has taken the line of ensuring regional representation remains on the board, and of course option 1 leaving the current zone structure as well. I think the WOLGA zones are very important to particularly country local governments, so I think that's an important part of the structure of WOLGA. But the introduction of the Policy Council will, I think, it is quite a large council, but then on top, the one thing that probably is a little confusing here is their idea of option 1 was that the board members would be elected from the Policy Council. I'm not entirely clear how that would work with the structure that we're proposing in our recommendation, to have a membership of 15 with 6 metro and 6 regional, 2 independent, and then there would be a chair. But I mean, that's for WOLGA's just looking for our comment on this at the moment. Ultimately, we're just telling WOLGA that we want to ensure regional representation exists within their board. I think that's vitally important. So very happy with the officer's recommendation and good to see what's been presented.
Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to follow on from Deputy Councillor Sciano's sentiments. I concur, and thank you.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? No speakers? The Deputy President, you wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 13.2, the reviewed communications and social media policy. This item was deferred from the November Ordinary Council meeting, and an an amendment was currently on the table, and no councillors had spoken to that item. The amendment was moved Councillor Terrantroy and seconded Councillor Clues. Unfortunately, both those members are not present this evening, so discussion opens to the floor on that amendment to change the wording in 1.6 paragraph 2. Is there a speaker for or against that amendment? The Deputy President.
Mr. President, could I just ask that you read the full details of the amendment, because it's not included in the agenda.
Sure. Right, so a foreshadowed motion was moved by Councillor Clues and seconded by Councillor Terrantroy. After straight away an amendment was made to that to change the wording in point 1.6, which is Councillor Public Statements and or Communications on Shire Matters. And the amendment that was moved was to remove the wording to ensure consistency in messaging to the community in the second paragraph. Yep. So that amendment is just before the voting requirements included in your agenda. question, Councillor Noonan. Just your microphone, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we're looking at 13.2. That's on. Is that right?
Yeah, we're on item 13.2.
And when was that added? I'm looking at.
Sorry, the agenda was updated after the agenda briefing session. So if you're on Docs on Tap, you need to exit the agenda item you're currently on and reopen the one which says the 21st of December 2022 updated. And that should include item 13.2.
Yeah, I'm actually on that, on the updated one, and I don't have it. I've got 13.1.3.
Oh, there's no attachments. So you're looking, yeah. So that's the attachment side.
There are the attachments listed, but this one doesn't have an attachment. Maybe it's down to here. Where at the bottom of it? I know, because I had it. It's a bit of a
Okay.
long one. So that was the last decision. Bit of a long one. And then this is the foreshadowed one too. Because that's still on the table.
Okay, thanks, Darren. All right. Thank you.
Found it? Yep. All right. Are there any other speakers for or against that amendment? There being no further speakers and the mover and seconder not being present, I'll put that straight to the vote. Those in favour of the amendment? And that's carried unanimous. So we return to the substantive motion, which was foreshadowed by Councillor Clues and Councillor Terrentroy. No councillors had spoken on the item. The mover and seconder not being present. The item opens to the floor. Is there any speakers for or against the item? No. I'll put that item to the... Sorry, Councillor Noonan, yes?
Yeah, if I could, I'm a little bit concerned that, and I apologise, I was unable to attend the briefing where I'm sure that this would have been discussed, but not having the mover and the seconder here as well tonight, I'm a little bit uneasy about not having them here as well, and I'm wondering about the implications, whether there would be any implications if we would have to defer this to the January meeting.
That's a possibility to be moved, and then it could be, it's for council to then vote on and decide whether it does so.
Well, I'd like to move a procedural motion, if I may, to defer the motion to the January meeting.
No, to defer to the January ordinary council meeting. All right. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Andrew? Does the mover wish to speak to the deferral?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm actually comfortable with relatively comfortable with the motion as presented, and I was as well with the previous version. I understand the intent of the motion, and I didn't then and still don't have any great concerns with limits on freedom of speech and all of that sort of thing, and I think it is very good and positive for council to have a not just the councillors but the Shire and councillors to be presenting a unified message that Capel's a great place, and I think that we do that. I don't think, so I don't have any concerns with the motion. However, I would just I appreciate that at the previous meeting when we did discuss it that there were some concerns raised, and I don't know that everyone's had the chance to fully run through those or express any other concerns that they might have. So notwithstanding that there may be, I can't see that there would be any drama or any problem if it were to be deferred for one more month. I don't imagine there'd be any implications.
Is there a question? Sorry?
That sort of is a question.
Council will just continue to operate under its existing
The way
policy
we are.
unless replaced. So.
Yeah. So I can't see it hurting us or being a negative thing to defer it for one more month, just so that we can, when we do get the chance, everyone gets the chance to have a look at it and talk about it and be comfortable with it. Thanks.
All right, I'll put that deferral to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that's carried 4-3. So that item is deferred till the ordinary council meeting of January 2023. Item 14, infrastructure and development reports. 14.1, tender 2213, Capel offset planning, Kemerton site 2 project. Is there a mover? Councillor Sciano.
I'm going to move an alternative motion. Would you like the alternative motion read for the floor?
Yes, please.
Yep. Alternative motion that Council 1 accepts the tender from Trannon Revegetation Systems for both $172,000 for A, $172,682.69, excluding GST, as detailed in tender 22-113 Part A for offset planting project site 2 Kemerton, and B, $7,350 excluding GST, as detailed in tender 22-113 Part B, separable portion for the offset planting project site 2 Kemerton.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Noonan, the Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we've had 2 tender responses in regards to offset planting at the offset site in Kemerton that, as councillors would know, relate to some clearing that took place to, I'm going to say, increase safety on some of our rural roads and the work that has been done there across 2 sites. What council's been made aware of, and the criteria itself is understanding. We obviously, when assessing a tender, look at the past experiences with the tenderer, their experience elsewhere, their general experience in the field, and their ability to do the job. And we also look at the actual cost, or what they're proposing, the dollar figure. And I know that in this case we used a weighting system of 70 for experience and 30 for cost. I guess where my view sways from the assessment panel's view is that I think cost should have been a greater weighted component of this tender, off the basis that these are costs that, though we have some budget available and we have a line item in the budget for offset tender, for offset planting, we've got a project that's in the $700,000 of work that we're doing $250,000 of offset planting for, and it's just not viable. I don't think it's viable going into the future, and I respect the staff have worked with council in regards to providing plenty of information before this meeting on the tender process and on the various tenders. I think that the direct cost of this tender needs to be considered at a higher priority. We are hearing anecdotally of local governments abandoning road projects that improve the safety on our rural roads because offset planting is becoming such a will become such a financial burden. And ultimately this is legislation that is passed on and enforced on local government by state government. We will not be able to escape it. But I think in this circumstance, we simply cannot go this far with the price. It was a relatively close tender, and I think that if you actually change that formula of weighting, you could potentially have received a very, very close result or a different result. I think there's an opportunity for staff to work with this tender and their who will rely heavily on subbies. And look, I think ultimately we have to really take into account the overall cost of this project. It's realistically, though it's in the budget, to me it's unbudgeted. It wasn't included in the overall cost of the actual work that's taken place. So it does sort of pop up on council. We're obviously learning, this is a new process, but we'll have to have a real think about this in the future.
Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Ciano. I agree with your comments. I think it's also worth noting that in the future it would be ideal if we could have these sorts of offset plantings done within the Shire. I think that that should be a priority, that we find or locate and get the state government to come on board with some rehabilitation sites within the Shire. I also believe that the two tenderers have certainly the experience to be able to complete the work to a high standard. They do offer different business models in terms of completing it in-house and depending on seasonal subcontractors. I think by going with the Trennan option, that may place a greater burden, if you like, on us, on our Shire officers to be more involved in terms of the supervision of the conditions and how the contract is being performed, but I think that that's actually a good thing in terms of the experience that will give our Shire officers in ensuring that these sorts of projects, rehabilitation projects, are done to a high standard. Because Councillor Ciano is absolutely correct that as road projects and other development projects as we go forward in time, that the offsets, the importance of offsets and providing suitable offsets, realistic offsets, offsets which can be verified, and I think that that's only going to increase in terms of its importance. So I support the motion as placed by Councillor Ciano.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could just echo the sentiments of our Deputy President and Councillor Noonan. I just think, you know, $100,000 differences can't be argued with. Look, in an ideal world, if money was no object, I'd love to see it done by a company with 100% in-house team. But I think we just need to look at the hard reality that it's a lot of money, and we should try and save it where we can. I do, like Councillor Noonan said, appreciate that it might put a bit more stress on our staff, but I would just ask them to maybe go along with it and do the best they can, and we'll keep an eye on it. I would also like to echo Councillor Noonan's thoughts that when I was going over this agenda, and I wasn't at the briefing either, to see the word Kemerton on an offset project for our Shire was a bit of a shock, especially when I'm heavily invested in the LCDC. Wonderful group of people who do great work in our Shire. I would love to see more of a focus somehow, some way on our own neck of the woods. If we're, you know, doing some clearing in this part of the world for good reason, for road safety, I'd like to see the money reinvested somewhere locally, and I think we should explore that as time goes on. Thank you.
Are there any speakers? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. I have a question, and I agree that I think price is important, but if I can just ask through the chair, if both of these companies have the same success rate clause. I'm not sure if that's probably the right terminology. So is there a period of 12, 24, 36 months that there has to be a certain percentage of the plants that have been successful in taking and have survived? Or does that make sense? Yep.
The Director of Infrastructure and Development.
So the scope was the same for both tenderers. So there is a clause in there that has a percentage of success as far as the number of plants and different species over 12 and 24 month period. So hence the additional water supply put in there if required in the separate proportion B. So that's consistent across the two tenders.
So I understood that bit, but was there one of the tenderers that felt that they could achieve better than that? I guess is perhaps more my point. So was one of the tenderers, they said, fine, your baseline might be 80, but we can guarantee you 90?
No, there wasn't evaluation to that extent.
Okay.
Do you wish to speak to the item or? Sure. Any other speakers on the item? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've heard the arguments and I can understand the dollars involved. One of the few things is that the bid assessment process takes a two-step process, and the assessors go through looking at the qualitative items before they've even seen the price. So that's basically where they come in. They've kind of indicated that this is the better contractor. Bearing that in mind, going into the quantitative price, because of the scoring and the percentages, it's obviously meant it's skewed, as you pointed out in your things. And I think we need to be careful of moving too far away from that when we go into bids, and maybe there's another method later on to have a look at that. I take the point of your questions, and they're very good, and I would have called them performance-based clauses. And so there is a performance-based clauses in the specification, which gives me a little bit more safety in the proposed agenda item. Comparison-wise, if you look, I like to look in percentages of prices. We're looking at a 30% saving, roughly, when you look at that. So yeah, it's hard to go past that. I'm hoping that we're doing the right decision. I don't think it'll be 30% at the end. That's my personal opinion. It's not. I think there's going to be other costs creep into it. The other thing that you've got to look at is there's an opportunity cost when we have to put more resources into managing a contract. What does that happen elsewhere in the Shire? So we've got to be very careful in our decisions that way. But I'm kind of okay with the item that's been moved.
Are there any other speakers on the item? The Deputy President, wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for process, in order to give reasoning for an alternative recommendation for the purpose of this, I think it's clear that Council is looking for the more cost-effective option, and has, for that reason, the proposal's been made to variate from the officer's recommendation. I take on board the comment from Councillor McCleary. I think it's a good comment about the opportunity cost, and I think there is a silver lining in that, which I think Councillor Noonan elaborated on quite well, which is perhaps it's not always a bad thing for our staff to be more involved in managing the contract. The staff may, or the organisation may disagree, given the workload, but there is something to learn from that as well. So, I mean, ultimately, these two tenderers, through the process and without identifying too much, because I do understand that this matrix is usually meant to be a confidential process. But I think ultimately these tenders weren't far apart from each other in their assessment. So very happy with the alternative recommendation. Look for council support.
And I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that's carried 6-1. Item 14.2, tender 2212, bore and pump maintenance for Shire assets. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCleary. A seconder, Councillor Mogg. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move the motion as it's read. Some of the things that and in the item as I read through it, that's kind of disappointingly as it's transferred to the Shire, we find out the ball field has not had a proper maintenance and operation program based on those things, and so there's a bit of catch up in that. As a result of this non-maintenance, I read that there's the extraction rate's been compromised from those bores, which is having an impact on the level in the lakes, such that. I did have a question about, but I'll leave that. So, my background, I've been involved with drilling boreholes and managing things and getting them resurfaced. So this is a really good plan going forward to make sure that we've got the irrigation systems in Dalyellum operating correctly. It's caused us a bit of angst in the community about how things are being irrigated around the area, so it'll be good to address that as well. That's my comments now.
Councillor Mogg.
Thanks, Mr. President. I concur with Councillor McCleary's sentiments and can't wait for hopefully this motion be moved so action can take place. Thank you.
Are there any speakers against the item? Speakers for? Councillor Noonan.
Sorry, yeah, just a question, if I may. In the report, in the officer's comment on page 71, it mentions that over the course of the last 2 months, intensive works have been carried out by Shire officers to rectify the maintenance structures that would have been identified. To identify the issues that were not adhered to by the previous contractors, and the costs of these works alone have totalled $140,000. So my question is there any capacity to recover any of those costs, or is that horse bolted?
The Chief Executive Officer.
Through you, Shire President, no, there's no recourse back on the contractor for the Shire to pursue.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCleary, wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that question from Councillor Noonan, and a wise question to ask, but I think it's been answered quite reasonably. Look, this is a motion that we need to do. Unfortunately, it's going to add some cost to things going forward. It is a long-term contract, so I'll move to put it to the vote.
I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. 14.3, additional detailed site investigation, reserve 31012, Harewood's Road, Old Tip Site. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dillon. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, it's something we just have to do because I remember rummaging around in that particular site as a young whippersnapper, and to think the stuff that we probably breathed in swam in, etc. Probably best we know a bit more detail about the site before we move ahead. So I put this, recommend this particular motion to my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Mogg.
Reserve talk, thank you.
Are there any other speakers for or against the item? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Dillon, for giving us a picture of your childhood. I'd perhaps suggest that that might be a reason why you're as robust as you are. Having a good, healthy childhood. My question, I suppose, or concern is a little bit with the wording of the this next phase, if you like, and this next further investigation. So the question is this simply going to tell us, yes, there is asbestos, there are radionuclides at depth and on the surface, or will it also go to the next step and tell us, and this is the remediation plan, or is that going to be the subject of another motion coming to council saying, okay, here's all the information, you've got to have a remediation plan, that's going to cost you another $60,000, $70,000, $80,000.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. The Chief Executive Officer.
Through you, Shire President. No, this part, so the first part of the exercise, effectively, Councillor identified the contaminants on the site. This second part will complete a detailed assessment of those contaminants and go a little further just to ensure that hasn't been any infiltration into groundwater movement and those types of things. The main second part of this exercise will be to provide the Shire with a management plan so that we know exactly how we can. So one of the challenges at the moment is with the identification of asbestos. It means that we can't manage the reserve like we always would with the slashes, so that's part of the reason why we've had to try and restrict people accessing the reserve. So part of this exercise is to provide the Shire with a management plan about how it can, noting the contamination, look after the reserve into the future.
Thank you, CEO and Mr. President. So I agree with Councillor Dillon that this is something that we simply have to do. We can't knowingly continue on with a contaminated site, particularly with people living in such close proximity and people actually using the site to walk their dogs and that sort of thing. So. And I'm pleased to hear that this will provide us with that management plan that we need, so that we know what we have to do to remediate the site. So I support the motion.
Are there any other speakers on the item? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, I concur with everything that's been said before. I did a lot of reading of the scoping of this, and it involves boreholes and logging, which is paramount to understanding the contaminations and what we're going to deal with on the site. So it's very important that we proceed with this contract or investigation a bit further. It's going to determine levels of risk that we need to deal with, and it'll fine-tune the next expenditure that we have to do on site. It's not the end of it. We're going to have something else come to council to deal with that, but we need to understand what we're dealing with first and then prepare the next lot of bidding on it.
Are there any other speakers on the item? Councillor Dillon, do you wish to close? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 14.4, Amendment to Existing Extractive Industry, Lot 2, Callinup Road, Jalurup. There is a revocation motion first, for which I require a mover, seconder and a seconder. So is there a mover for that revocation motion? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sciano. And a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
No, I think that's pretty straightforward that we have to do something there, so I'll leave it at that. There's the motion to revoke the previous decision.
The Deputy President. The seconder. Are there any speakers for or against that revocation motion? Councillor McCleary, you wish to close?
No, I'm fine.
I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? That's carried 5-2. Now move to recommendation 2. Is there a mover for that recommendation? It has to be on the table first, Councillor. It needs to be on the table first. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Noonan. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank the gentleman who came in to discuss the motion today. I think it does make sense if we're already having 130 trucks going in and out and not getting complaints. Then I think that makes sense to keep that level on Cullinan Road, and I appreciate that. That if there haven't been any complaints by neighbours, no one's ever called me or complained about it. I ride that road regularly to just for a bit of exercise, and the road's in good nick given the amount of vehicles that traverse it, and it's important that we have access to that resource. One query that I had, or thing that I found interesting, that was cleared up. Yeah, so I'd like to move that motion and get this back on track. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councillor McCleary.
My first is a question, because I thought the figure was 30, not 130. Or is it just my hearing aids playing up when you were when we had the presentation earlier?
It's 130, Councillor.
130, right. Yeah, okay, look, this is what's been carried out before. So if 130 trucks were moving in and out and there's no complaints, and now we've got an option where there's some more funds coming in for maintenance, which I think is a good outcome. If we go down the path of probably not going to this change, we might be back in SAT with some more discussions. We might miss that opportunity.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Andrew.
I actually have a bunch of questions, if I could. So,
yes.
This is obviously a revisiting of the October agenda item, right? So I've brought up the October agenda. So what page am I on? Page 101, section 5.10, number and size of trucks. So the average annual extraction rate is said to have been 80,000 BCM, which can fit into 80 truck movements per day, being 5.5 days a week. With an increased extraction rate of 180,000 BCM, the applicant says can still be catered for in 30 daily truck movements, assuming trucks in the larger end of the haulage capacity are used. So, my question is, if we're still working on 180,000 BCM, why does the applicant require an additional 100 truck movements a day above the 30?
So I believe those 30 were in addition to the 80 that were also... So the total was 110.
There's nothing in here about 110. The officers say that an extraction rate of 80,000 BCM a year will fit into 20 truck movements per day. An extraction rate of 180,000 BCM can be catered for in 30 daily truck movements. So if the BCM isn't rising above 180,000, why would there be a requirement for an additional 100 truck movements a day?
The Director of Infrastructure and Development.
I'll have to take that one on notice, councillor, but I do know that there is 130 truck movements per day currently occurring to and from the site, and that this recommendation is consistent with what has been happening over quite some time, and it has been happening to fulfil the requirements of the market as it stands right now with the works that are occurring around the Shire and through the ball.
I have a follow-up question. So the 130 truck movements a day, is that just the applicant's word, or have we actually got that counted? Has that been officially accounted for?
The Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Thank you for the question. That is the applicant's word. We haven't counted them ourselves.
Okay, and I just want to confirm that the 180,000 BCM is the capacity per annum of sand that they'll be extracting from that site.
I can't confirm or deny that. I'm sorry.
Anything further, Councillor Andrew?
No.
Are there any other speakers for or against the item? Councillor Dillon?
Question, if I may. Excuse me, Mr. President. Just truck movement, is that one empty in, one full out? Or is that two movements?
You're correct. It's one in, one out is one is one in and one out. Yeah. So it's 130 times 2, if you like.
Are there any other speakers? The Deputy President?
It's probably more of a query, but I just noticed that the condition S, maximum steepness of a batter slope of 1 in 4 shall be applied to all rehabilitation slopes. Well, last month we endorsed the extractive industry policy, which I think this could be contrary to that currently. And I know that we originally assessed this in October, but since October we've actually firmed up our local law, or our policy. So it's a bit of a tricky situation now, because we've got something, we are actually also being asked to do something contrary to the policy that's been previously endorsed. If I could get clarification.
Yes, that's a question. The Chief Executive Officer.
Through you, Shire President, the local planning policy extractive industry is currently just a draft policy adopted by Council for advertising. Separately to that, the Officer's recommendation when this item came to Council back in October was to support the batter slopes at 1 in 4, because through the SAT mediation process the applicant had demonstrated the capacity to rehabilitate that slope through additional expenditure and additional effort.
Thank you, CEO. Obviously I hadn't considered that portion of the advertising of the draft policy in that question, so I don't think I have anything further to discuss.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Noonan, do you wish to close?
Yes, thanks, Mr. President. Yeah, I had the same concern initially when I saw the motion, but I did read through and I'm just trying to find it now, but there is a government, I think it's the basic resource materials guidelines, so that the council, that the Shire officers used to, which had a guideline as for 1:4 at the moment. So whereas there are other pieces of guidelines which were non-committal, didn't provide a guideline or specify a slope, but it is based on, I think it was the basic resource guidelines. So I think this motion is a good motion. It keeps the pit open. It keeps access to a resource. It is worth noting that the area to the north of the Callan Road extension, the old pit, where the rehabilitation in there had looked pretty desperate for the first few years that it had been, after it had been completed. We've had two good winters, and that area is looking far better now than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So and it is also at quite a steep batter slope. So I'm confident, well, as confident as I can be, that if we have good winters, that we'll certainly, that those good rehabilitation results are possible. So and particularly with the use of modern or more well-researched practices, the reuse of the topsoil, more use of mulching, doing it stage by stage, the way the proponent has proposed, that they can get a good result. So I'm optimistic for that. So I'd like to commend the motion.
I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that's carried 5-2. Item 14.5, advertisement of draft local planning policies. Is there a mover for those? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. These are interesting policies, and I read through them all leading up to this meeting. I had a question on the signage and advertising. It talks about sizes of signs, but in construction there's a mesh sign that's put up, like if you go into now Stadley's, or even the proposal to build a new playgroup. It's got a fence, cyclone mesh fence, and then it's got like that shade cloth advertising. Does that fit into this policy, or is that something outside of that? Is it treated as where screening the business of the construction and controlling winds, or have we covered that enough in this signage, or is there something that we should add to it?
I believe the policy does cover that in a way. It says that, as one of the dot points is that it must display the company's name and logo and the owner of the project or developer of the construction project. So if that bunding meets that criteria, then it is eligible.
Thanks for that. I suppose best now I move the motion as read with the 4 local planning policies.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, this is just more or less to assure people that we're going to, it's openness and accountability, I suppose, putting it out there for people to read as drafts, and that way people can see our thinking, our officers' thinking, and it's just good policy to advertise these sorts of future changes that might affect our residents. Thank you.
Is there a speaker against the item? Speaker for? Other speakers? Councillor McCleary, wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. I did have a bit of a thought there. These are going out as drafts, so they'll come back to council at the end. So all we're moving here is to get them out, get the comments back, and then have another review based on the comments that come out. So I'm quite happy with that process.
All right, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 14.6, Lot 1, 433 Duquesne Road, amendment to PA 244/2021. Is there a mover for that motion? Councillor McCleary. A seconder, Councillor Sciano. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move the motion as read.
The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not much to say on this item. As it's been clarified, we're obviously dealing with a stockpile that remains on the site, so there's no real plan of extraction, but rather the depletion of that stockpile and removing it from the site. So no problems in that regard.
Are there any speakers against the item? Councillor Andrew?
It's more of a question.
Yes.
So, with the granting of this licence, does it have to be phrased the way that the last paragraph reads? Because the last paragraph of the proposal reads, stockpiling of such resources cannot be entertained unless a valid approval is in place for the site in order to ensure the sand can lawfully be extracted and rehabilitation implemented and completed. The applicant is seeking a further extension of 1 year expiring on 27 April 2024. So I guess my question is that are we able to provide them with a licence that omits the words in order to ensure that sand can be lawfully extracted, keeping obviously the rehabilitation part, or does that have to be in there?
I'll have to defer to the director. I mean, it might just be a point of semantics, as in extracting from the site, as in cutting away, not necessarily extracting from the ground. The Director of Infrastructure and Development.
So the extraction will require the extraction from the ground to the stockpile, and then from the stockpile trucking out of the premises. So that is extraction in its entirety. Therefore, to take one out, and I understand what your intent is to stop any more extraction coming from the ground, but there is no further extraction coming from this site. This is purely just to remove the stockpile off the site and clear it ready for rehabilitation. There is no further extraction, so I don't think any change to that condition will really have any material difference to the outcomes.
Shire President, if I can just add to that, Councillor, Part C condition says that Part C of the recommendation, you will note that the extractive industry shall be limited to the area shown on the development plan. So the development plan then basically covers the stockpile. So it limits the condition of the licence and the operator being able to stray outside of that stockpile area and start extracting somewhere else.
Sorry, but isn't that referring to the red square? And that red square looks like that covers the entire site. It's not just a portion of it that they may have sand stockpiled on.
Councillor, can I just clarify which attachment you're looking at?
Page 81, figure 1, subject site. That seems to be the only picture or aerial photograph of the site.
We'll just get that clarified.
Oh, figure 3.
That's figure 1. I'm just trying to find figure 3.
I don't believe I have a figure 3. Which is where?
Sorry, it's the red area located on the plan is figure 3. It's numbers 11292-8. It's
So
if you're on
what-
Docs on Tap, it's
Yep.
in the big document. It's page 31 of 55.
So outside of the updated agenda,
No, it's in the updated agenda.
I've just got pages 1 through to 124. I don't. That's what I mean. So it's outside the updated agenda.
Oh yes, sorry, it's in the attachment to the item. Not the actual agenda item. Sorry. Just did that and I searched the number.
Attachment 14.6 on Docs on Tap.
Sorry, Doug. What page?
31 of 55.
31. So what little red area am I looking at?
The area down the bottom. So the red hashed is multiple use wetlands. The area that's just circled in a line and dot is the extraction area. At the very bottom right hand.
Do you know what he means? I don't know what he means.
Question for
Just one at a time, sorry,
Yeah.
Councillor.
or just to clarify.
So that whole pink area is a sand pile.
It's the extraction area. It might not necessarily all be a pile, but it's also what will be rehabilitated. So the final surface will be re-established to pasture.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, sorry, is it?
So,
Oh, hang on.
if you're talking about the area that's
Yeah, no,
surrounded by the pink hashed area, that is stage 2, and that's a huge area.
Yeah, no, sorry, I've We've gone the
That's
wrong
not-
area
not a
then. It's
stockpile.
the area above. It's the blue area. It's the blue area, which is all cleared. Yep. Yep. And that's stage 1. Yep. Apologies for that. All right.
So there's no touching of stage 2?
No.
No, okay.
Councillor Noonan, did you have a question?
No, it was on exactly that same
Yep.
line, just to
Yeah, I think I confused the situation. Yeah.
qualify that.
All right, are there any further speakers for or against the item? Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close?
Sorry,
Oops,
sorry, if I may. So, sorry, Mr. President, if I could just clarify that
Yes.
in order for any future clearing or extraction from stage 2, that would mean another application coming back to council.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, they'd have to apply for another licence and go through that appropriate process.
Yeah, because I note that the current extraction licence, which is an extension of an old licence, is, as best I can tell, based on a environmental approval which was granted back in about 2008, and even then in 2008 there were significant concerns raised about the clearing of the vegetation there, because even though the understory has been largely cleared due to grazing, they are very, very big trees, very big peppies, very big marri trees on that block, and that they are habitat for carnabis, Bodan, red-tailed cockatoos, as well as possums, western ring-tailed possums. So it would have a significant environmental value, particularly as part of our local planning strategy 8. It actually is part of the linkage, the environmental linkages going from the coast across through to Boyne and beyond, and that if there have been updates in the any updates to environmental legislation, that should really, in the last 14 years, then really this would require a new environmental management plan, or any further application to extend into stage 2 would require a new environmental management plan, and clearly offsets and so on. So I just wanted to be very sure that we're only talking about the stockpile and not there's no green light to go to do any further clearing or take anything from stage 2. That's
Yeah, it's only extraction of the existing stockpile and no conditions about stage 2.
magic. Thanks, Mr. President.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close? No? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? That's carried 6-1. We now move to section 15, Community and Corporate Reports. 15.1, the accounts paid in November 2022. Is there a mover for those? Councillor Mogg. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sciano. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I read the motion as read and support the officer's recommendation, and thank the staff for organising. Thank you.
The Deputy President. Are there any speakers for or against that item? No. Councillor Mogg, do you wish to close? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. 15.2, the financial statements for October 2022. Is there a mover for that item? Councillor McCleary. A seconder. Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a couple of things I've highlighted in this, and they're on the under the overview part on page 119, and they're good stories. We're in a good, strong cash position and indicative of the annual budget being approved earlier in the recent. So that was a good outcome of the hard work that was done leading up into the budget, and it's giving us position there. We've also seen an increase. So the total interest earned year to date is 44,000, which currently is 13,000 roughly above where we were expecting to be under the budget. So that's another good story in the finances at this half yearly point. We noted on there. And well, I've got a comment, and the comment there is that we're tracking, and the overall spend continues to track below budget, which is a bit of a concern, whether we're going to meet our targets of expenditure on capital work. So it'll be good to watch that over the coming months.
Councillor Dillon. Are there any speakers for or against the item? No. Councillor McCleary, anything to close?
Thanks, Mr. President. Yeah, look, it's pretty straightforward. As I said, we need to keep an eye on where we're going with our expenditure. It's always a bit interesting in these years where resourcing of contractors and stuff gets a bit hard. So I'm keen to see the next quarter when it comes back in, and we're into setting up our next budget just to see where we're at.
I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 16, new business of an urgent nature. There's none. Public question time. Are there any questions from the floor? No. Motions without notice. Councillor Dillon, you're seeking to move a motion without notice?
Oh, yeah.
All right. You need a majority. All right. Could you please just outline your motion, please?
Certainly, Mr. President. Been consulting with a few people.
Sorry, just read the motion.
Okay, that the Shire staff investigate the viability and possible costs of fencing the children's playground equipment, in brackets or parts thereof, at Earl Scott Reserve, due to its closeness to the car park, and being in the vicinity of Capel Drive. Looks good. Thanks, Talia.
All right, we just need Council's consent to consider the motion. So, no, we need a... Can I have a mover that the motion be considered? Councillor Mogg. A seconder. Councillor McCleary. All those in favour? That's carried unanimous. All right, so motion's on the board moved by Councillor Dillon. Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Dillon, you can speak to your motion now.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, first time I've done this, but I've been working with some people in the community who have expressed concerns to me about the fact that the children's playground equipment is very close to the car park and Capel Drive. There's a lot of mums who utilise the park for various things, yoga and the like, and there are some children in various groups who play on the equipment who are runners and, shall we say, maybe not as aware of their environment as other children. When you look around other shires, when I was up in Perth recently, Hyde Park, for instance, even the Donnybrook children's playground, they are adequately fenced. If it was more of a distance between the children's playground area and Capel Drive, I probably wouldn't be as concerned, but there are people in the community who are genuinely concerned for the welfare of the kids who play in that playground, and I'd just like to be a little bit proactive and at least have our staff look at it. I know there would be an unbudgeted cost involved, but I think according to the constituents who I've been talking to and my observations, I think it is at least worth getting Shire staff to have a look at it and maybe an approximate cost of what we'd be looking at. Thank you.
Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate Councillor Dillon for bringing this motion to Council. I do question why it doesn't have a fence in the planning when other playgrounds in our Shire do have fencing around such playgrounds. So I highly support this and look forward to it coming back to Council.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? No other speakers? Councillor Dillon, do you wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Are there any other motions without notice? No. Motions for consideration at the next ordinary meeting of the Council? No. There are no items for consideration behind closed doors, so I'll declare the meeting closed at 7:26. In closing, I just wish everyone a safe and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you to all of those who have worked with us to make the Shire of Capel an even better place to live and work throughout the year. Thank you especially to our community groups and volunteers for the amount that they contribute to our district. Please stay safe and take it easy on the roads if you are travelling. A special shout out to our Shire staff who will be working over the Christmas break or will be on call, our rangers, our parks management and some of our works crew. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all in the new year. Thank you.